Verbs are the most important element of language. Even the earliest cave paintings depict more than subjects. They depict animals in movement, people dancing or shooting an arrow or riding an animal. Stories involve movement, and the movement is the verb. Verb phrases in many languages, and especially the Indo-European languages, are inflected with bound morphemes to create tense, number, person, mood, and voice. In English, our verb phrases sometimes require auxiliary verbs, especially if we want different tenses or moods. I'll be focusing on our quite goofy and difficult English verbs, but while I do, I'll be wishing that we had something more organized like Spanish or German or Latin or Greek. In English, we have three persons: I, you, and someone else. And we have two numbers, singular and plural. It's important to realize that other languages will mark these differently. Some languages break down the conjugations by gender as well, or have singular forms, two-person forms, and three or more person forms. There are 12 tenses in English. Other languages can have more or fewer. For us, we have 4 kinds of present tense, 4 kinds of past tense, and 4 kinds of future tense. In English, we conjugate our regular verbs in present simple and past tense. Take the regular verb to plan. We can conjugate that in the present tense. I plan, you plan, he plans, we plan, y'all plan, they plan. Okay, not much of a conjugation. The only change is for the third person singular. For past tense, it's planned, and it's the same for all persons and numbers. So far, not a lot happening for our English regular verbs, but things go downhill from here. In order to get to these other tenses, like future, we need the help of auxiliary verbs. We can get to future simple by a future tense of do, which we conjugate will, attached to the infinitive. I will plan. You will plan, he will plan, we will plan, y'all will plan, they will plan. If we want other tenses, like future perfect progressive, we'll need combinations of to have, to do, and to be to get to them. Another important variation on the verb is the mood. In English, we have 5 moods: indicative, imperative, interrogative, conditional, and subjunctive. Other languages might get to these through conjugations, but we use modal verbs like may, might, shall, should, will, would, can, could, or must. This means that if someone wants to get to a future perfect progressive tense with conditional mood, you're going to need several auxiliaries to get there. He may as well have been shaving. There's one more modification to verbs that, in some languages, gets inflected with morphemes. That's the voice of the verb, active or passive. In English, I suppose we got to the point where adding auxiliaries and modals to the verb got to be too much. We resorted to changing the word order. In the active voice in English, the subject precedes the verb. The subject is the actor and the verb is the act. If we want passive, we move the direct object to precede the verb and add to be in front of the verb. So any clause that can be completed by Vikings is a passive voice. The actor isn't known. Some languages make good use of the passive voice. In my case, I use the passive voice to avoid taking blame, and that's the best use, really. But ancient Hebrew used the passive to signal an act of God. Israel was saved. Israel is the object, saved is the verb, and the subject is unnamed. It's understood to be Yahweh. As we discussed previously, the morphological typology of a language will have an impact upon the way that verbs are conjugated. Synthetic languages can have lots of options, as adding inflections can be a sadistically large set of conjugations. I mean, check this out. It's a single verb, to loose or untangle. Here are all the inflections available. When languages are synthetic, they can get very complex sets of tense and mood. Analytic languages do not have these options. There are fewer conjugations, so auxiliary and modal verbs or word order have to suffice. And for this reason, we often lose some of the options of tense or mood. I once had an exhausting conversation with a person, let's call him Larry, who wanted to make the point about John 3:16. He asserted that when the text says that whosoever believes in him may not perish, that the may indicates possibility. Maybe he won't perish, maybe he will. I wanted Larry to shut up about this because in Greek, the not perishing is subjunctive. It's a kind of blessing. Some English Bibles translate this will not perish. The problem is that we don't have a strong subjunctive voice, and so our modal verb may messes us up. Analytic languages often have fewer tenses and weaker modes. There are also different kinds of verbs. Action verbs are the easiest for us to understand because we typically learn an early definition of verbs as action words. But some actions aren't complete when we hear the action. We need an object to fully understand the action. These are transitive verbs, verbs where we expect a direct object. Sally hit is incomplete semantically. We need the direct object to understand what kind of hitting Sally did. We need to know what got hit. Intransitive verbs do not need an object. If you tell me Brian sang, I might like to know what song he sang, but Brian sang and Brian sang a song are equally precise. One way of describing kinds of verbs is the difference between dynamic verbs, where action changes the condition, and stative, where the condition doesn't change. Dynamic verbs change a condition. Jerry purchased a new car is dynamic because Jerry transitions from a condition of not having the new car to having it. Stative, on the other hand, would be a verb like Clarice likes Brussels sprouts, in which Clarice exists in a state of eating disgusting vegetables. We also think of verbs in terms of linking properties. The most common form of this is the to be verb. Bob is a painter connects two nouns, Bob and a painter, together with the verbal equal sign. We tend to use this to place smaller semantic units, Bob, into a larger semantic class, the group of people who are painters. But we can also link to adjectives. Sharon felt sad. The feeling is linking Sharon to the descriptor sad. One last detail about verbs that has been plaguing me with all of my examples. Our most frequently used verbs are the most likely to be irregular. This is true for most Indo-European languages. The more frequently they're used or had been frequently used, the more likely they are to be irregular. When we introduce new words or convert old words through derivational morphemes, we're likely to follow the established rules. But notice how in almost all Indo-European languages, the verb to be is irregular. It's the most common verb in any language, and so it's most commonly irregular. Now, if you listened very carefully, you heard me say, or had been frequently used. Some words had a greater representation in our language in times past and became irregular back then. Now, as we use them less often, they remain irregular. Think of a word like dig. In our post-industrial information age smartphone universe, you can exist just fine without ever having picked up a shovel. Shoot, my son-in-law has a shovel only because he hasn't returned mine back to me. But in an agrarian culture, the work of the farmer was much more regular. And so the verbs are more likely to be irregular. Well, this bypass into verbs was necessary because, as I mentioned, verbs are the most important part of speech. They carry so much of the semantic load in an utterance, and in some languages, a veritable suitcase of inflectional morphemes, that they rule the function of the utterance. Let's go back to the phrase heads now and see how the other phrases can exist in the verb phrase.